Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets, how to increase your market business success while providing people with fresh food. Farmers markets are essential. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer or food maker selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast. This week on Tent Talk, we are discussing value-added products for farmers and food makers. I am one of your hosts, Bridget Myers. I'm a longtime farmers market manager and education coordinator at Farmers Market Pros.
And I'm Kat Fields-White, Director of San Diego Markets, still an active Farmers Market Manager, founder of Farmers Market Pros, and host of the Farmers Market Pros community.
And I'm Justine Marzoni-Mead, Tent Talk producer and marketing director for Farmers Market Pros.
I feel like you have such a light job description right now between conferences and things.
It's nice.
What a happy
relaxing.
time for Justine. The calm before the storm again.
Coming right back. Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by the Kitchen Door, connecting food entrepreneurs throughout the U.S. with well-run, shared-use kitchens. Find clean, licensed kitchens in your area and concentrate on food production and not kitchen and equipment maintenance. Find more information by clicking the Kitchen Door logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Welcome back to Tent Talk, everyone. This week we are talking about the benefits of value-added products for farmers and food makers selling at farmers markets.
So what do we mean by a value-added product? Because everybody uses that term differently, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
let's define this.
Let's
I feel like
define it.
most of the people in the Midwest, maybe not most, but a lot of people that I talk to in the Midwest call everything that we would call grocery is called a value-added product. Whether it's made by a farmer or somebody else, they use that term for what we would call a grocery product.
Yes.
So that's interesting. And then officially, the USDA calls a value-added product, and of course they're talking about farmers in particular, any product that changes the physical state or form of the product. So if you mill wheat into flour, flour is your value-added product. If you make jam, it's out of your strawberries, the jam is a value-added product from what your basic item of production is.
Yeah, the things that you grow.
Right.
You're making salsa out of your tomatoes and onions and peppers.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. We did an episode on this, I think, last year. It's number 124 when we talked to Ellen Rowley, who she helps write grants for the USDA's value-added grant, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But she had a slightly different definition where it was like anything that adds value to what you're selling.
And in that grant, that's how it's defined. So even if you were to take your blueberries and put them in a box, like a clamshell, and design a nice label for it, that would be a value-added situation. And really a very basic value-added thing that surprisingly few farmers ever think about doing, or maybe they think about it and decide it's too much trouble, but I think would sell like hotcakes or sell like pre-cubed squash, is taking their vegetables, cutting them into cooking-sized pieces, putting them in a little box with a label on it. That's a value-added product. It's not a substantial change to the product, so you could actually even do that in California, which has really weird regulations about value-added. And the margin on that squash, if you sell it as pre-cut chunks versus a squash, are so huge. And you would be effectively competing with places like big supermarkets and Trader Joe's and such that provide that. And I know that at least some of the people right here co-hosting would be very inclined to buy that.
I'll pay triple if you chop it. Yes, I am one of those. I like the pre-cut and the pre-prepped and all that stuff. It saves so much time for me. So yeah, that's a great way for farmers to increase the income that they're getting with their produce that they're already growing. I will say, especially when you're talking about squash and things like that, that could last a long time in a crate. They could bring it to multiple markets in a row if it doesn't sell once you chop it. If you don't sell it, then it's a waste product. So understanding you'd have to kind of balance that out within your own farm
figure out
finances.
Your inventory program.
Yes, but done well, I feel like that is such a great benefit. You'll just sell more if you kind of alter the state of the squash, as we're saying. So,
it really changes the margin.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll talk a little bit too about some of those barriers for entry for these value-added products. So for farmers, there's tons and tons of them, right? Juices and salsas and jams and all
pesto.
Oh, yeah.
Guacamole. I mean, one of our avocado farmers makes guacamole. That's a value-added product. Huge.
Yeah.
You know, he also grows lemons.
Yeah.
So in our state and a very few other states where value-added products are really highly regulated, the farmer has to grow everything that's in that value-added product.
I feel like we can say it because it's our podcast. Stupidly regulated. Overly regulated.
I mean, I was very involved with California Small Farm Conference and some other groups during the time, and CDFA, during the time when all of that was debated. And I get what their rationale is.
Yes.
And I hate it.
Yep.
I voted against it all the way through. I'm still voting against it in my mind.
I feel like their ideas could be executed in a much more effective way where they could still get, you know, the true heart of they don't want farmers just reselling a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with their farm, and balancing that out with, if you want to put a wick in your beeswax from your bee boxes, that could still qualify.
It should be a percentage thing.
Yes, it should be a percentage thing, and it really is not. Our, you know, cut flower growers, like, you know, can't sell a vase, and that isn't changing, like, the fact that you're growing flowers and selling them. So just little things like that just clearly get under my skin. I could just
So
talk about it all
The
day.
worst of all, our stone fruit growers can't make peach pie, which I'm so jealous of every time I'm in Portland. And I see
the worst.
peach pie, or anywhere, or I see, you know, apple cider donuts from the apple growers at the Union Square Market.
I was just there talking to that farmer, and I'm like, look at all these donuts. She's like, what? I'm like, our orchard growers can't do donuts or pie or anything. They can do cider, which is fantastic, but they can't do these things. And she was like, why? And I go,
it's very confusing.
California?
Yeah.
But depending on where you are, farmers can do lots of those things, as you know, just said, juices and ciders, guacamole, dried fruits and vegetables.
We have a lot of dried fruit, like sun-dried tomatoes, things like that. Take your herbs and make spices and herb blends and things. We could
and
a lot of opportunity.
So usually that term's used, and certainly by the USDA, it's used to describe things that farmers create, but really food makers can also do value-added things. So we're seeing a couple of our bagel bakers and bread makers that are doing things like bagel chips and baguette chips, which is so smart.
Yeah.
You know, it's an easy way for them to control inventory, and people love them. We always have so many dips at markets, and no crackers, so that's
not
a
enough
good
crunchy
thing.
items.
One of our fish vendors takes the trim when he cuts a whole salmon into salmon fillets and things that people buy because they're convenient to cook. He's got lots of little pieces left, and so he's doing things like salmon spreads, which is great.
Yeah, I'm making ceviche, things like that.
Yeah.
Exactly, which gets us to one of the big benefits involved in selling value-added products, which is reducing waste.
Exactly.
Yes. Especially, you know, if you're selling at a lot of markets and you have things left over, or also if you just have a really good year and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I have so many more strawberries than I know that I can sell. I can turn some into jam.
Right.
Or into pies or whatever else you can.
And we tell our shoppers, like, hey, like, load up. The season's ending. Go get all those, like, end-of-season peaches and make preserves and things like that. But you know, it's also such a great thing when the farmers can do that and then sell it, because that puts more money in their pockets. They can keep farming. So.
Yeah, it also, so in addition to increasing sales or selling things that you would otherwise have to throw away or give away, it also is really nice for farmers to be able, and also for food makers, to expand their offerings.
Right.
You know, it's great if you can go to a farm stand and get something that you'll eat for breakfast, like strawberries, but then also get something that you'll eat for dessert, or, you know, and it just gives them a lot more to put out on their table.
Right. Makes your display more full. A lot of times value added, like we talked about, the squash is going to have a lot better margin than the base product. Expanding what you're selling so that people have more to choose from. People like to have that choice. One of my favorites is, I remember when we had something that was making plant-based mayonnaise, and they were making it out of aquafaba, which is the water that's around chickpeas. And they were throwing away the chickpeas in the process of making
They
that.
were?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Call me. I eat like 5 cans a week.
Right? Well, then it finally came to them that they could take the chickpeas and make that into an amazing salad. It had a little bit of the mayo in it. It had some chopped celery and some chickpeas. And oh my gosh, I think our whole market team ended up eating that for lunch for months on end.
Yeah.
Veo, come back.
And along with that, one of the huge benefits, I think, which goes along with increasing sales, is you're pulling in a new audience of customers. Like for me, when Veo was at our market, I literally never bought a jar of their mayonnaise, but I ate that salad almost every single week.
Exactly.
And some farmers, you know, if you want to reach a new audience, and maybe people don't cook for themselves, but they'll buy your salsa, or they'll buy your guacamole, or they'll buy your jam. So it's a way to reach
people. They're not sure how to use fresh herbs, but they'll take a packet of dried herbs or a soup mix that you make out of them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not going to make my own salsa. I have before, but usually that's not what I'm doing. But so Gaytan Farms at our markets, they sell all the ingredients you would need to make your own salsa, so people can choose that option, or you can just buy that pre-made salsa, and it's so great. So those are just sales that they would never see if they didn't have that value-added product, and it opens you up to just a wider customer base, like you were saying. I also think it's a great benefit because what we're doing is trying to create a space where people can get most of the things on their grocery shopping list in one place. So if I don't have to go to a store to find salsa because it's not at the market, if I can just get it right there while I'm shopping, that just saves me a trip, and I spend more time at the market. I can do all of my grocery shopping there. So thinking of that as making those offerings so broad to keep your customers on the street and shopping there.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think there is kind of also a subliminal thing too, where if you buy a value-added product, you're like, oh, all this stuff came from this farm.
It feels so
is
good.
kind of knitting together that just mental awareness of knowing where your food is coming from, and realizing that not only does fresh vegetables taste better, typically the fresh made pies and all the stuff that come from these value-added products, they taste way better than.
Absolutely, the processed one. If
you've ever had grocery store guacamole, and then you've compared it with Heritage Farms guacamole, you'll know what we're talking about.
Yeah,
so the taste is just way, way there. And then if you know where it came from too, you can see the farmer that grew the avocados, and then when you go to eat that guacamole, it's just very things that gets in your subconscious.
It's developing that relationship with food on an even deeper level.
And knowing where your food comes from. So just like when you go to a chicken farm and you realize, eggs don't just sprout into cardboard cartons. They come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Salsa doesn't just all of a sudden sauce up. You still have to grow those tomatoes and onions and things.
Where are they getting that from?
Good way to make people aware of where their food comes from.
Make a connection.
Right. So obviously value-added products are really valuable. And if you've been to a farmer's market or you're a market manager, obviously you're really familiar with them. You've seen them a bunch. Now you're probably going to be noticing them all over the place. So why isn't this something that every vendor, every farmer, every food maker does?
Some of it's, I think, just that a farmer thinks of himself as a farmer and maybe not as somebody that plays in the kitchen. So some of it's just,
sense.
I think some farmers are just really
thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
And some farmers are too busy just keeping up with what they're doing, basically by pulling things out of the ground or off the trees to have time to do other things.
We've seen that too, farmers that have tried to do dehydrated vegetables or make kale chips and things like that, and they really want to do it, but it's just you only have 24 hours in a day, and it's if they want to be planting and harvesting and selling at the markets, they don't have time for that extra stuff. So it depends on the scale of the farm.
Yeah, just having an extra set of hands can be kind of a barrier or a challenge. Access to a kitchen, depending on where you are in the country. Again, the level of regulation varies. Cottage food laws have helped a lot because certain items can be made in a home kitchen and by extension a farm kitchen.
Yeah,
but as opposed to a commercial kitchen, but then in a lot of states, even the cottage food laws are limited where you can only make certain things, and you certainly can't make acidified food that might have issues with botulism if it's not bottled right, that kind of thing. And so even farmers would have to go into a commercial kitchen situation. There's certainly rental kitchens throughout our sponsor, earlier in the show, but access to a kitchen, having time to get to a rental kitchen, that kind of thing can be a barrier to getting rolling.
Yeah, and like we've talked about with cottage food before too, just because you have a home kitchen doesn't mean you can make 100 bottles of jam. That takes up a lot of space, and if you don't have commercial equipment in your home kitchen, that can also be a barrier.
Yeah, and the example of squash you gave earlier, access to cold storage too. Probably if you're a farmer, you only have enough space for your lettuces, say, and squash you could keep outside of the fridge. If you cut it up and you're prepping it for the market as a value-added product, then that's going to have to be refrigerated.
Right, and just space on your truck to haul it. That squash probably takes up more room in that box with the cute label than it does as a squash in a crate. So, all those things, certainly lots of barriers. Lack of funds to get started on the whole operation, which would help you you have those extra hands and, might help you have a way to transport more stuff. That's a trick. But there is a great USDA value-added producer grant, and it usually comes out early spring. It's usually due in April or May. I know that Ellen Raleigh, like we talked about before, she did a great episode last year for us. She helps guide farmers through that value-added producer grant. And I know that right now she is comatose somewhere on a beach because she just went through the grant process with everybody.
Earned her vacation.
She's having a well-deserved Mai Tai.
Yeah, she can be really, really helpful. I don't think she's ever taken on a client for a value-added grant that she didn't get. So
awesome.
She's well worth it. Look her up. But that lack of funds can be a challenge. That grant can be a big help to that one.
Yeah, and if you go to the USDA, we could link it in our show notes, but there's lots of different things that grant can help for. If it's trying to build a kitchen at your farm or hire somebody to help you work in the kitchen or even stuff like designing labels for packaging. It seems, in terms of grants go, somewhat flexible in how you can apply those funds to developing your value-added products. And what's nice about it is Ellen has gotten really good at kind of getting a little bit creative of helping you identify like what value you're adding to your product.
Yeah, exactly. And making sure your costs are correct. So you're not doing all this extra work and paying for extra packaging and maybe extra spoilage and then not charging enough to kind of recoup those costs and actually make it a value for your farm.
Make sure that you're increasing your value. Yeah, I will say USDA and the administration, we don't always love what the government does in terms of supporting farmers, but they've been really generous the last few years on getting money to farmers and farmers markets to expand. So we appreciate those funds coming into the market.
Yeah.
So what can market managers do to help their vendors explore value-added products?
I'd say encourage your vendors to make them. We've had a lot of conversations with farmers and vendors where, we've just said, hey, like, have you ever thought about doing this? And they're like, look at us like, no, we have not. And then it doesn't occur to them because they're really busy. They're really focused on their product or their crop. And they just need someone to point it out to them. So have those conversations with your vendors. I mean, as market managers, we're really familiar with their products. We're probably shopping for making our own grocery lists at the market and using their product. So you probably have good ideas of what they could be doing with that to help kind of add that value and to add a little extra item. It could also help your market because then if you're looking for a jam vendor and you don't have any jam vendors, but you have a strawberry grower, maybe suggest to them that they look into making jam and kind of helping them try to figure that out. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody. And then the shoppers benefit as well because they don't have to leave to go buy jam. So definitely encouraging your vendors to make those value-added products, giving them ideas, and then connecting farmers and food makers to commercial kitchen operators and resources like we just said. So kitchen door, using the grants, like all those kind of resources that are out there. Help make those connections for them.
Yeah, and I mean, as market managers, you're probably like the most familiar with your different vendors' ingredients. You vetted their applications, you talk to them, and so just kind of like asking them like, oh, hey, so what are you doing with this?
All those garbanzo beans.
Yeah, or oh, what happens to your tomatoes at the end of the season if you don't sell it? And I mean, I'm sure they've thought of stuff like that before, but just kind of asking questions and prodding them and encouraging them. And also, like, I know Kat has done this before. If there's just something that isn't at the market that she would like to be at the market, she'd be like, hey, you make this. Couldn't you also make this? Like, isn't it the same?
Could you do me a favor and add this to your product line? I'd like to buy it.
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's the idea when you're curating is to, if you look for resources and you develop resources. We've actually had a fair amount of farmers come through then after that and take the Vendor 101 course to get familiar with kind of the different ways of operating a prepared food or a grocery line versus a farm product.
Yeah. It's always fun to see them come through because just to hear all their cool ideas and then get them kind of caught up on the permitting and the education for making a different type of product than they're used to. So I think that's really helpful. And also as market managers, you're probably getting a lot of the shopper feedback. The shoppers probably aren't stopping at each individual stand giving kind of direct feedback. They come to us a lot and they say, oh, do you have anybody selling this? Or I wish you did this. Or, wow, these are my favorite berries. I wish it was a jam. Like, we just have a lot of those conversations organically at the market. So as like a kind of a feedback, the comment box, if you will, we can take those ideas and kind of bring it to the attention of farmers and vendors who maybe haven't thought of it before.
Yeah, like if somebody asks, "Oh, hey, is there apple cider vinegar here?"
Yeah.
Like 5 times at the info booth, and you might need to go to your orchard farm and say, "Hey, can you just take care of this for us, please? Make us some."
We'd like to say yes to these
Yeah.
questions. So who wants to make it?
Yeah, so I'm sure, all of our listeners at your markets, there's some really cool value-added products, and it is this really, like, just creative, use of materials. But what are some of our favorite or most curious or unique or standout value-added products that you've seen at farmers markets that you've visited?
Well, recently at our market, we've got a bagel baker that has started selling seasoning that's made from all the toppings that go on the bagels. When they sprinkle them on the bagels, some ends up on the parchment underneath. He's just taken all of them and poured them all together and put them in a jar, and people are loving it. So he's got big jars of that. And then while I was traveling the last couple of months, I saw some really interesting things at some other markets, and one of my favorites was mushroom jerky. I thought was just brilliant because people who love jerky, and a lot of people are being more plant-based and they like an alternative. Mushrooms can be very fragile, so the mushroom farmer, if he ends up with some left over at the end of the day, a lot of times that'll end up in waste. But this guy made like 4 different flavors of mushroom jerky where he was dehydrating them and putting different seasoning on them, putting them in jars. And I had a little chat with him, and he was definitely making so much more money on the mushroom jerky than he was on mushrooms, which is still a decent margin product in terms of produce, but he was killing it on that.
Yeah. I was just in New York City, not just, but for the holidays, and at the Union Square Market, there was a potato farmer that was making potato chips.
So smart.
Duh.
So smart.
Duh.
And it just felt so healthy because they were from the fresh potatoes, and he had like purple potatoes, so you got like purple
that's
potato
fun.
chips, and he had a big
Oh.
variety using different kind of salts and things, and so you could buy potatoes, and he had berries and some.
You should
some
have
other
like
kind of produce.
frozen French fries, like if you got a cutter.
Yes, so
Right?
many,
That'd be
so many
great.
opportunity with
So
a
many things
potato.
you can do
Yeah.
with potatoes.
Yes,
yeah.
but it was great, especially like as a tourist. That was a great. I'm not going to buy a potato and like put it in my carry-on, but I grabbed a bag of chips and ate it on the plane. So it's kind of thinking outside the box like that. That was a new one that I hadn't seen. And then of course my favorite apple cider donuts are there. But yeah, soup mixes. We've seen a couple farmers do that. One of our farmers is making salads. So like salads in a little clamshell, just
Which
chopping
makes
up the
so
lettuce.
much sense to me.
I mean, just shredding some carrots and lettuce, and then
Well, and a lot of times they've got trim from when they're trimming
Yeah.
up the vegetables and
Yeah,
things. And if you
makes
take all that
sense.
and toss it into a salad, people love having a salad to pick up at the market. Any kind of stuff that you can pick up at the market that's kind of healthy and proteiny appeals to me. I've seen it at other markets. I wish one of our egg vendors would do this. People selling hard-boiled eggs.
I would love
or
that.
like
Smart.
a really good potato salad.
Yeah.
Oh, potato salad would be
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. So just thinking kind of what
Chicken
do you
pot
do?
pies. For the places where you can expand a little bit, you don't
Yeah.
have to use just ingredients of your own production. In the UK, actually, I saw a lot of farmers that were poultry and beef and different kind of meats that were selling a lot of things like chicken pot pies and pate. And there was a beef farmer that was selling a lot of steaks and roasts and ground beef like all of our meat farmers do. But he also had this giant grill and was selling burgers in the market. It was awesome.
Or like meatballs would be really
Yeah.
good too.
Yeah,
Exactly.
stuff you could take home.
Yep.
Yeah, a couple other ideas too for food makers that aren't farmers, because kind of the concept works too of how do you use your waste, or how do you do a slight spin on something. But our friends here in Marshall, she talked about it on our podcast last time, I think. She started making little like taco seasonings and spice packets that was kind of a spin-off of her hot sauce business.
Smart.
Yeah.
And it gave, it was more products on her table, and also it made it a lot easier for people who are traveling to take home. They can take home these spice mixes that they don't have to check a bag. They could just toss them
So
in their
many of the
carry-on.
sauce vendors could do that because we
Yeah.
had a chimichurri vendor that she sold chimichurri, which is a liquid product. Can't put it in your carry-on, too big. But then she started selling it dry with a little recipe thing. Here's all the seasonings. Add this much oil. Add this much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Maya Madsen, I don't know if she's doing this currently, but she did do this during the holidays one year. She was selling cookie dough,
Such a good
which is
idea.
great.
Yes.
And then also for a while she was selling, I think she called them like cookie sprinkles or cookie. It was like kind of like day-old cookies that you could like kind of put on like
On
an ice cream sundae or
like
something.
crumbles,
Like crumbles,
right?
yeah.
Like breadcrumbs.
Which is
That's a good
fun.
idea.
Or, you could use it as a cake topping
Yeah.
or something like
That's
that.
a great idea.
I feel like especially with baked goods, you could sell croutons or
Yeah,
stuff
and
like that.
Take your leftover croissants at the end of the day and make bread pudding.
Yes, please.
And
then
that
call
means,
us.
yeah, then call us on the phone. Send
Immediately.
it. Here's our address. But I mean, people who have perishable items, like such as produce, like tomatoes and things like that, and lettuce, or baked goods, it's like that's perishable. So thinking about things like making crumbs or breadcrumbs or things that can be a little bit more shelf stable.
Yeah.
I know one of our apple growers makes like apple chips,
Mm-hmm.
and those are so good. It's such a good snack, and that'll last longer than an apple. It's like in a little bag. So just thinking about an apple butter and things like that, thinking about things to make your product last longer, and then of course some of them are going to make your product a little bit more perishable, but they'll be so popular at the market and just increase kind of the broadness of your offerings.
That same
Yeah.
apple vendor is now doing vinegar.
Oh, that's right, apple
So
cider
smart.
vinegar.
Yeah.
And he always does apple butter. He did pear butter last winter, got a
Yeah.
little set. So, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of things. Sometimes it takes a minute to think about what you
Right.
can do. So just make those
Yeah.
brainstorming sessions, with your vendors. And if you're out traveling and looking at other markets, or maybe you're the one listening to this podcast and maybe they're not listening to it, like bring all that information that you're absorbing and kind of bring their attention to it, because you don't know if they're even thinking about that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it may be hard. Like at this time of year, it's like
Oh, everybody's so
crazy.
busy.
Everybody's so busy.
Yeah.
But these are things that like you can be thinking about if your market takes an off season,
Mm-hmm.
or once it gets to a quieter time of year, that's when you can really get those wheels turning. Or maybe depending on your market organization, you can pull. If you have somebody that sells jams,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can pull them in and say, hey, come talk to my vendors about how to do this. Or you can
Yeah.
have kind of a skill share thing with your food makers and your farmers, kind of help
Great idea.
expand your market's offerings.
For sure. Yeah.
So smart.
Yep. Lots of ideas.
We like to keep it rolling.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Tent Talk today. And big thanks to the Kitchen Door for helping food makers find the right licensed commissary kitchens to support their farmers market businesses, and for supporting Tent Talk, the farmers market podcast. Get cooking by clicking the Kitchen Door logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Farmers markets are all about connection, and all of us, operators, farmers, and vendors, keep learning. Connect with people just like you from various parts of the country and share what's happening in your area in the terrific conversations over in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community. If you're actively involved in a farmers market, please find us there, answer the 3 qualifying questions, and join the group. You can also message us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros or email us at connect@farmersmarketpros.com. If you're looking for further education, check out our online course offerings at farmersmarketpros.com. Thanks for listening to Tent Talk. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you access your podcasts, and tell us and others how you're enjoying Tent Talk. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is proudly produced by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Justine Marzoni Mead. Original music by David Mead. Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll have another great episode next week, so tune in.